Hi there. I'm Kate Breslin, the President and CEO at Schuyler Center for Analysis and Advocacy. And I'm joined by my colleague, Dede Hill, our Director of Policy here at Schuyler Center. And we're so excited to have a conversation, and we do hope it's a conversation. We're hopeful that, as we have this discussion here, informally here in our office, that you think about questions and comments that you have and that you share them with us online and even afterward, because we hope this is a conversation that happens for the next hour or so and happens kind of going forward, and especially throughout this budget and legislative session. So what we thought we'd do is, as we kick off the state budget season here in Albany and the legislative season here in Albany, we thought it would be a good time to sort of reflect on what happened in the last year, particularly as it affects children and families, and especially those who are experiencing poverty in New York, and to think about what we hope to see and what could move New York forward in the coming year. So, and we also, of course, we're excited to share with you resources that we've been developing. You can find our policy priorities on our website, and we'll also be hosting the State of New York's Children data briefing next Wednesday at the Legislative Office Building, and you can register via our website for that. We'll be sharing some really kind of, I would say, well-organized data points and information about New York's children and families. And so we're excited about that next Wednesday, the 17th at the LOB. One of the things that we've been doing these last 6 months or so is hosting panel conversations specifically about New York State's commitment to reduce child poverty by 50% over the next about a decade. And we've had some fantastic conversations and some great panelists. And then this is sort of a part of that series where we've been thinking about the things, as I said, what's been happening and what we think could happen in the coming year. And so just to frame that out for you, New York's child poverty rate exceeds that of more than 30 other states. So we are, in that way, not leading. And it is especially bad for children who are of color, children who are Black, children in Latino families. And what we worked with many of you on is support of a policy, and that's now in statute, where New York commits to cutting child poverty in half over the next 10 years. And one of the ways of getting there is a gubernatorially and Senate and Assembly appointed Child Poverty Reduction Advisory Council, which is chaired by the governor's office and the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance. And then there are state agency people on it, and there are advocates, including myself and other partners and allies, to look at the data and to hear directly from impacted people and advance priorities that will cut child poverty in the next 10 years. And so here at Schuyler Center, we think of this as one of the things that in many ways touches almost all of the work that we do. And so we work in areas like ensuring health coverage, childcare assistance, child welfare, and family economic security. Poverty and family economic security touches all of those areas. So that's sort of the frame for how we think about what we're going to be talking about. And we're at this moment in time, we're thinking a lot about the budget, and too often our budget process doesn't look at people's experiences and issues holistically. We kind of break down into silos. We have, budget tables where we talk about where the legislators and the governor talk about very specific issues. So we're always thinking about what are ways that we can think about budgeting in a way that real people and real communities can benefit, because we as people and as communities don't live our lives in silos. We need to think about things holistically. So that's another sort of underpinning of how we're thinking about the policy issues that we work on. So again, we're excited for this conversation. As you think of things you want to, raise or say or, ask about, please use the features on your Zoom and do that. And we have our coworkers here who are going to help us with that. So I'm going to ask Dede. We thought we'd start out with sort of where are we in the budget process now, and go on from there.
That sounds great. And Kate, it's so nice to get this opportunity to just chat.
I know, right?
I don't know, some of you know, Kate and I have had a difficult entry into 2024. Kate injured her arm. I welcomed in the new year with COVID. So this is awesome.
We actually haven't
seen each other.
Seen each other.
You're all witnessing it. So this is great. And we love talking budget. So, all right. So just really quick, because I know a lot of folks who were in conversation or joining this conversation know all of this, but just to ground us, where are we in budget season? I'd say we're officially in budget season. The State of the State address really kicks things off. That's when the governor gets her opportunity to sort of talk about her vision and lay out, her top priorities, signal to the lawmakers, in advance of the budget negotiations, what she's really hoping for, maybe where she won't go. And so we heard a lot of that in the State of the State, and we might talk about that a little bit later. So next up, our next big date is Tuesday, the 16th, is when we're expecting the governor to release her executive budget. And that really gets things moving. We will then, here at Schuyler Center, and we know a lot of you out there, will be spending the next few weeks reading the thousands of pages that comprise the executive budget. And it can be dense and it can be obtuse. And so we'll all be trying to figure out what is in there. And then, then things sort of shift to the legislature. The legislature will be putting out what we refer to as their one-house budget. So their sort of counter proposals are going to come out typically in March. And in the meantime, they will be holding joint legislative budget hearings. We expect those to start really soon, maybe the end of January. And that's an opportunity for lawmakers to engage in dialogue with the executive to talk about what is in the executive budget and sort of understand the details. It's always also a really great opportunity for us being advocates and concerned citizens to engage in the budget conversation. So these budget hearings are open to the public, and we will be there, the Schuyler Center, talking about what we are really hoping to see in the final budget to strengthen your children and families and set them on a path to thrive. And then ultimately, we're all moving towards April 1st. April 1st is the date that the governor and the legislature are charged under our Constitution with coming up with a final agreed upon budget. And so in the meantime, we are going to be just racing to be part of the conversation and make sure that that children are front and center as lawmakers are negotiating, this budget. So Kate, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
It's top of mind. I think it's really important and to say out loud right now, as we look to several months, with very little sleep and, working really hard. Why is it so important, for us to be engaged, all of us who care so deeply about New York children and families, and particularly those who are low income? Like, why is it important for us to care about the budget and raise our voices around the budget?
The budget, almost, I would say more than anything else, really demonstrates what our priorities are. So we can say all we want, and our elected leaders can say things. Where we put our resources is what shows where our priorities are. And so, you know, we all love the beautiful speeches. But what we are gonna be looking for is, where does the money go? Because we can talk about a lot of different things. Where we put our resources, you know, just like in our own communities and in our own families, really demonstrates where our priorities are. And especially in the realm of family economic security and addressing child poverty, we are not going to address the significant number of children and families experiencing poverty in New York State, which is around 800,000 kids, without resources. And so we are looking to see how and where are the resources flowing. And I would like to just mention that last year, there was a very good example of a policy initiative that actually helps get money into the hands of people who need it in a legal way, through the child tax credit. So the child tax credit is available to families up to a certain income level. And New York's child tax credit had historically excluded children under 4. And for no really policy reason, actually sort of in you know, the opposite of that, to the extent that special young children are those who are most likely to live in poverty. And last year, while it wasn't in the executive budget, in the final budget, there was an inclusion of children under 4 in New York State's child tax credit. Now, of course, that costs the state money. So that's always where the rubber hits the road. There's nobody, I don't think, we didn't come across anyone who said, we don't think that's a good idea. But then it comes down to a question of priorities. How is New York State going to spend its money? And who is it trying to benefit? And so that's a great example of something that in the end benefits our youngest children and their families in New York State.
Yep. Can I throw in another one?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I love to talk about childcare, and the last 2 budgets in New York State have really seen historic investments in our childcare program. And in particular, I mean, there's been a number of ways this has showed up, but I want to focus on like really historic expansions to access to childcare assistance. And childcare assistance is the principal means by which the state supports working families who are struggling to cover the high cost of childcare. And essentially, childcare assistance is like it's like the state paying the tuition.
Can you remind us,
Yeah.
I know you're, about how much it costs, how much childcare costs. I think, because we
Yeah.
talk a lot, I think there's a lot of conversation, there's a growing amount of conversation about childcare. We talk a lot about the cost of higher ed and other things, which are all important conversations. But I think for those of us who don't have young children right now, or, you know, or at all, or, you know, I think it's shocking when we talk about the cost. Can you give us some ballpark?
I sure
Yeah.
can, and I know as someone who, my children are now in their teens, I sort of blocked how expensive it was, right? But I still remember the pain. So on average, let's say you have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, you could easily pay $40,000 a year, easily. And that
Anywhere in the state.
anywhere in the state, with it being much higher in certain, and there are some variations. That's probably if you have your children in a child care center, it might be a little bit less in other settings like family-based care, but it's really an extraordinary amount of money that almost no family in New York State can afford, be they working class, you know, middle class, upper middle class, you know, however you identify. And so let me, so the reason I get so excited talking about the historic expansions, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that family that I was just thinking about. So let's say we have a family of 3, so a parent, 2 kids, 1-year-old, 4-year-old. Last year, let's say this family was making about $83,000 a year, which happens to be, for those who are keeping track, 85% of state median income. And what happened in last year's budget is New York expanded access, like the upper eligibility limit for access to child care assistance to 85% of state median income. So all the way up to $83,000 a year for this family of 3. Last year, before that expansion went into effect, that family, as I said, could have been paying $40,000 a year for childcare, almost half of their income. This year, that family, if they can get access to childcare assistance, and we can talk about some of the barriers, but if they can gain access, that family could be paying $580. $580, right? I'm not gonna, but per year, 40,000 versus 580. So the extent to which these expansions can be life-changing and have been life-changing for many families. I mean, it gets me a little verklempt. It's amazing. So we're really excited about that. The state also made some increases in the reimbursement rate. So how much a provider receives who's caring for a child receiving child care assistance. Absolutely not enough to reflect the true cost of providing high quality care, but an important increase. Also some small one-time bonuses that have mostly gone out to the workforce. So all of these things, and I will say, wholly insufficient to what the field needs, but these are important expansions, investments that we just need to celebrate. And I'm like glad to have that opportunity. But this on the heels of that, can I just talk about one disappointment?
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about that.
It's weird, I knew you were. So in last year's budget, like I said, all these really important expansions. The reason I want to talk about this disappointment, it's been very much on my mind, but also when you think about expansions, they don't mean much to a family who can't access.
Right.
So we can talk about how life-changing this can be for a family, but there are some families who can't. And so that it doesn't mean anything to them. And so one group of families that we've been really concerned about for a long time, but very actively in conversation about this for the last 2 years, are parents who work in the gig economy, who work fluctuating hours, who I saw a study recently that in the US, like 1/3 of of workers don't know their work schedule more than 2 weeks in advance.
Yeah, there's been a lot of attention to that, especially more recently. For
Right.
sure.
So these are incredibly hardworking families that are dealing with a lot of stress that comes with not, knowing your schedule. These same families have a really hard time accessing childcare assistance, and that is because the state has this rule which says, if you're eligible for childcare assistance, you can only have it for the exact hours that you work or are going to school or are in training. And so what that has meant for these families is many of them just simply can't access childcare assistance because it doesn't. So there are a couple of reasons. One is and one of the principal reasons is they can't find providers, childcare providers who operate at very thin margins and have very appropriately strict staffing ratio requirements, right? They have to always have the right number of staff per children, number of children in the classroom. They can't afford to have staff that are there if all the seats are full.
Yeah.
So what this means is a lot of childcare providers, as much as they want to take all families, sometimes they can't take a family that's on this fluctuating schedule.
Right, because they need to know they have like a full payment coming in rather than sort of these patchy payments, right?
So there's been a bill. It is now passed the legislature twice with overwhelming support. We call it the decoupling bill. And that would end this practice. It would say, if you are a parent who's within the income eligibility and is working, you get a child care subsidy or child care assistance. And then you can work it out with your child care provider and based on your family's needs, and you can have a steady schedule for your child. This is really good for kids.
Yeah, you would think, right?
Think about your little kids. What families are having to do is that they have to wake up their kids during nap time.
Right.
They have
time's up. Yeah.
Time's up. Or this is even worse, right? The 2-year-old trying to pull that 2-year-old when they're in the middle of story time and they're super engaged. And then they have a tantrum and everything spirals from there. It's not good. It's not good for anybody. So we were thrilled that the legislature passed this. And again, for various reasons I won't go into, they actually passed it twice. Unfortunately, the governor vetoed this bill on December 23rd. And we're smarting and
Is there an invitation to come back? I mean, do we think we'll see it in the executive budget?
So, right, you're right. I'm still feeling a little pain, but also a lot of hopefulness because the reason for the veto was the stated reason was fiscal reasons. And so we're really hopeful because we know that this governor has been a tremendous champion of childcare. I just talked about the historic investments, and also she understands that we want to make sure that that childcare is broadly available to all the state's families. So we're really hopeful to see this in the executive budget on Tuesday.
Are there other things that you're thinking about that we're hoping to see, or should I talk about what I'm hoping to see?
Let's hear what you're hoping to see. I can't wait.
So, as I said, we're always thinking about, this child poverty frame. And one thing that we did hear in the state of the state message, and then we have seen in some other Medicaid related documents, the Medicaid waiver, is that the state, New York State, is seeking to try and provide continuous health insurance coverage for through Medicaid and CHIP for children from age 0 to age 6. So meaning that if a child and Medicaid and CHIP, Child Health Plus, are health insurance coverage programs that cover low and middle income children and other people So based on income and need. But at present, there's a process that, families have to go through to make sure their kids get recertified every year. And we know that, New York really has long committed to, coverage overall and especially coverage of kids. And New York State does a great job trying to keep people covered. But we also know that people fall through the cracks. They move, they don't get the notice, there are any number of different reasons that it happens that people fall through the cracks, and what that can mean for a family, has financial implications and health implications, and beyond, and then just to think about the stress of, being concerned that you don't have coverage. But, especially in the early years of life, our medical community really expects to see kids regularly for developmental checkups and for, immunizations. So this is a commitment New York State to move forward with trying to cover kids continuously from age 0 to 6. So that's something that we've been hopeful about seeing, and we got the signal through, the governor's state of the state that may happen. So we're super excited about that. And then one of the other things, that I'm eager to see the details on is, in the state of the state, the governor talked a lot about mental health and, the real crisis that we're facing in mental health care, mental health in general and mental health care, especially for children and youth. And, so I think I would just say I'm hopeful, we're hopeful that, what we see in the budget matches what we heard in the language, that there's real, that there's gonna be real investment in making sure that, we can get kids in early, and consistently, including, and that is sort of or related, also what we hope to see is a significant, increase in, funding for early intervention, which is a program that, helps identify very young children if there are developmental delays and disabilities, and make sure that they, get the services that they need to ideally be able to, kind of catch up or to function at their highest capacity. So there's a nod to that again in the state of the state, and we're hopeful that we'll actually see some serious investment there in the budget. And then, of course, we're always thinking about tax credits, or ways of getting money into people's pockets who need it. And, there's been so much attention, lately, we know that New York is losing population. It appears to be, it's people moving, it's families who are moving, and it's an affordability issue. People can't afford to live in New York. And so, of course, we hope to see things like housing and food security. We also know that, the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit are, effective ways at getting money into people's pocket who needs it. They all have income eligibility guidelines. What we'd like to see on the child tax credit is, making it available to the lowest income people, because, they're in some cases people who are, living in deep poverty. And we also know that would have significant racial equity impacts. So those are just a handful of the things that, we see sort of, not the tax credit stuff, but we see some of the other stuff teed up in the state of the state.
Yeah.
But really what we need to see is that's what we'll be looking for when we get the budget on Tuesday.
Yeah, and I wasn't in the office, on State of the State Day, but I heard that there were some high fives around the 0 to 6.
Yes.
Yep. That was very, very exciting.
Very exciting, super exciting.
Yeah.
Yes,
Really good for kids.
it would be great, and it's good for families. Yeah, I mean, imagine the stress of
No,
you know, your 3-year-old not not having insurance coverage, and especially if yeah.
this is good. It's really exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what about you? What are you looking for in the budget?
Oh my goodness, where do I begin? No, I mean, all the things you said, yes, plus one. You know, I think you and I, all of us here at Schuyler talk a lot about some of the like frustrations associated with the fact that our budgeting process is just year over year, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's one year at a time. And we know that a lot of the systems that support children and families, they could use some transformative change, and transformative change doesn't happen in a single year.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so that's just me sort of lamenting. But when I think about what I'd like to see in this year's budget, like, you know, if I could have any, well, I'm not gonna say if I have anything, but I would love the investments that we see to be like building blocks towards larger visions. And if I can, because this won't surprise you, but I will frame it in terms of childcare just for a moment. But we as the Empire State Campaign for Childcare, New York statewide campaign for universal childcare has and also within the context of the Child Care Availability Task Force, which is a governor's task force, that there is a shared sort of understanding and goal that the state really needs to be moving towards universal childcare. There's a stated commitment of the state.
You mean like public education, sort of in the vein of what public education looks like. Okay.
Exactly. Thank you. No barriers to access, no means testing. And
It's a public good.
it's a public good and should be, you know, treated and funded as such. So that's the stated long-term goal of the state. And there's no expectation that we get there tomorrow. But what I really like in the budget is that the investments are incremental, are moving towards that big, beautiful shared vision.
That's what I think about on child poverty too, that because our budgeting process is a year-to-year process, you know, we're also always thinking about, well, how much, I think that tends to overemphasize the cost and underemphasize the benefit, right? In everything we do, you're trying to think about what the cost benefit analysis is in some way or another, you know, whether you're doing it in a rigorous analytical way or just sort of, you know, back in the envelope. And I think when we're thinking about our state budget, because it's a 1 year and because we're not really usually thinking about what's that 10-year goal. We're overemphasizing the cost and underemphasizing the value or the benefit. And I'm not sure, I mean, I think we know there are policymakers out there who think that way. And I'm not sure exactly what the structural, how do we get to a point where our budget makers are thinking in that way? So rather than only looking at what's the ledger say for this year, but thinking about what's the New York we want to see in 10 years. That's my like, I don't know, light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. I want to follow up on that, but I also just want to say one more thing that I really am looking to see in the executive budget on Tuesday, which is a permanent, sustained investment in the childcare workforce. So it needs to be said because I think we just talked about these historic expansions that, the state ushered in, in the last 2 years. But these expansions are all in jeopardy if we don't have a workforce, right? And the workforce, folks are leaving the field, they can't afford to stay in the field. And this is something we've been, it's well understood. The average salary for a childcare worker is about $35,000 a year in New York State. They are among the lowest paid professions in the state. And the state has, in the last few years, provided these bonuses or these sort of one-time payments, which have been, we've heard really, really critical for providers, for the workforce. But we also know that it doesn't change behavior in the long term. Folks are still leaving the field and folks are not entering the field. So we're looking for the state to make a permanent, permanent line of investment to continue to supplement the workforce this year and for the years that follow. So I had to say it because,
Right, good.
because there's a lot that hangs in the balance.
Well, I'm glad you said it, and I think it's important to note that it's true in so many of the human services areas. So all of our human services professionals and paraprofessionals, whether it's human services, often also in mental health, certainly in the kinds of services that early intervention provides, we're losing the human beings who provide those services because they can't make ends meet.
Right.
So I think, there's some attention, for example, in the state of the state to some workforce issues, which I think is encouraging.
Yes.
And I would love to be thinking about both, you dig in on the childcare workforce, and I think that it has its own concerns, and it would be great to see sort of a more comprehensive approach to kind of what I think of as writ large, the human serving workforce.
Yes.
Because it's a huge problem in so many areas.
Yeah.
And it's large and it's growing. And it's another example of where, unfortunately, the way I think the way our budget making works,
Yes.
that ends up sort of in different silos,
Mhm.
rather than us taking a comprehensive approach. And then I'll just call out one other thing, because there is a lot of attention, at least so far in the state of the state, there's some attention to the health workforce.
Yeah.
And some, interest in getting better data about the health workforce. And there was a law that passed a few years ago, the health workforce data law, that would generate significant health workforce data if our government funded it in a pretty small way. So I think that's one kind of relatively low thing that we could see happen, hopefully this year.
Okay.
Do you have questions? Are you? Yeah.
I had a question come in about revenue, in that we keep hearing that this is gonna be a really tight budget year. And just wondering if you can speak a little bit to that issue and how, the state can and should be paying for these programs and initiatives that impact kids and families.
Do you want to kick that off, or you want me to?
I'll let you kick that off.
Yeah.
I got some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think the important thing is to identify our priorities and figure out how to pay for them. And I think there's been some good data coming out more recently that, I think that there's a talking point out there that if we raise revenue on the highest income earners, they'll leave. And what we're seeing is that that's not necessarily the case, that what we're seeing is that families are leaving because they can't afford New York. And so I would suggest that we should be focused on the affordability question, and this is something we've heard the governor talk about a lot, about how do we make it easier for everyday New Yorkers to live their lives, and we should be thinking about what does that mean? What does it mean to make New York more affordable?
Yeah, and exactly. And the only thing I would add as well is, this was something that sort of jumped out at me in the State of the State address. And there were, so many great things in that address, but there was one statement that just gave me pause, which was something about, I'm going to paraphrase terribly, but sort of acknowledging that there's some budget challenges, and that calling on sort of all New Yorkers to sort of tighten their belts. And I think that always makes me nervous, because we are a state, and not like unlike many states, but we actually have some very deep inequality in the state. Income inequality is actually, our state actually leads in that respect. Also, just if we look at at our budget and where our state dollars are going, not like proportionately, not a lot goes to our kids and families. Not a lot goes to sort of the lowest income, traditionally sort of disinvested communities that have been disinvested in for decades. So,
Yeah.
so if in times of belt tightening, you do it, you ask everyone to make the same sacrifice, you're just baking in and deepening inequities. And so I would urge to not do that.
I'm so glad you raised that. Yeah, I mean, I think the belt tightening concept resonates, it resonates with people who are listening. But there are some people for whom there's just there are no more notches, and we can't just apply that equally. We have to be thinking about that always. And I find that similarly, it would be great if in a future world that agencies that serve those who are most disenfranchised were asked not to tighten their belts, but to identify specifically what can your agency do that would lift people out of poverty. Not just how can your agency cut corners, how can your agency save X%, but what can your agency do that would contribute to the state's commitment to reducing child poverty. We have the data, we know there are things that public investment works, and that's my other kind of shining star, is a day when that's the question that our governor asks our state agencies, not only how can you cut 5% or how can you keep your spending even, but how can you participate in our goal of lifting kids and families out of poverty?
Beautiful, Dede. I love that. Do you have any other questions for us?
Not at the moment.
Come on, people. Can we talk for a minute about task forces and advisory councils, because we love talking about that. And I think maybe the frame, we've gone back and forth a lot about the challenges associated with year-to-year budget, budgets that are only for 1 year in duration. And it feels like maybe there's opportunity I'm thinking, of course, of the Child Poverty Reduction Advisory Council on
Mhm.
which you sit. Are there opportunities there, and are we taking like full advantage of those opportunities, or what do you think?
Yeah, and I like thinking about this, because, we, here at Schuyler Center, we also just are really committed to, the idea of collaborative engagement with our government partners and really being good partners sort of with our external partners and our inside state government partners. And, so we really take seriously when we're serving on those, those different bodies, and you serve on the Child Care Availability Task Force. We have other members of our team who serve on other advisory bodies. We take that really seriously. I just want to put that out there. I think one of the things that I'm excited about, the Child Poverty Reduction Advisory Council is by statute expected to assess the executive budget. So as the executive budget comes out next week, the Child Poverty Reduction Advisory Council members will be reviewing it and very, kind of pointedly looking to its, the budgets, the executive budgets impacts, positive or negative, on child poverty and racial inequity. And so I think that we did that, we as an advisory body did that last year. I think we take that very seriously. I hope and expect that was like that our budget makers considered that this year, sort of what are the things that we are doing and can do to meet this multi-year goal.
Yeah.
So that, and that'll, that'll be, I think, a serious undertaking, and it'll be, it then goes to the whole New York State Senate and New York State Assembly for their consideration as they move forward with budget negotiations. I think the other responsibility that this particular task force, like most of them, and there are a few that are identified in the state as potentially new bodies.
Right.
And typically they're asked to, they're populated with experts who have lived experience and people who are kind of policy experts. And they're asked to advise the governor on a particular topic. And so the Child Poverty Reduction Advisory Council has not officially come out with recommendations.
Yeah.
I expect that'll happen this year. So yeah, I'm hopeful. I mean, there is something mentioned in the state related to poverty, but that wasn't it was new to, so I'm not sure what that is.
Yeah.
It was not one of the things that has come up in our Child Poverty Reduction Advisory Council conversations.
Yeah.
So I think, there's, frankly, there's a little bit of sort of like, why?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, so as you noted, I'm a member of the Child Care Availability Task Force, which it's fun to talk about the history. When it first convened back in 2017, I think 2018, the chair was then Lieutenant Governor Hochul. So that was really, really exciting, and now it has, continued under her role as governor. But there were some proposals around childcare that were mentioned in the state of the state that really weren't that were also new to me, even as a member of the Child Care Availability Task Force, and we've been, actively in conversation around all issues childcare related, and so yeah, that we sort of similar, like, I wish we had the opportunity, but at the same time, and at the same time, there is so much opportunity with the Child Care Availability Task Force. And I'll just point to two things that really get me excited when I think about the work ahead. One is, so that we are now in our second iteration of the task force. And when it reconvened under new statutory authority in 2023, one of the changes that was made to the task force was to expand its membership to include many more childcare providers from different modalities, so family-based childcare and center-based childcare, and from all over the state, and then also more parents. So these are the experts,
Yeah.
the folks who are directly impacted by these policies, and so critical to have their voices at this table. And it has changed the dynamic and changed the conversation. It's been a wonderful, year in task force 2.0 is how we refer to it. So really excited about that, and really hopeful that this body of experts will be, tapped as
Yeah.
much as possible, like take advantage of us. Everybody is engaged and enthused. And then the one other thing I'm super excited about, two things. One, we're looking to release a report. I think it might be this month, very soon. So that's going to be really exciting. And then
A report about like recommendations moving forward, or?
yes, recommendation, sort of where things are, and yes, and starting to recommend for the years to come. And then we have one more year as a body, and it looks like the focus of our work for 2024 is going to be one of our charges as a body, which is to, let me see if I can get the language right, but develop and begin to implement a phased-in rollout of universal childcare. And this is, in the statute, and this is sort of the piece that we haven't, tackled as much as we had liked. So we're really, it seems like, and there's still conversations, but it seems like this is going to really be our area of focus for the coming year, which is really exciting. Right on. All right.
Well, we're super excited about the budget, if you can't tell. And about, really working well together with our team here, but we're so appreciative of folks who've joined us today for this conversation. And I'm sincere in saying, like, I hope this is the beginning, not the end of a conversation. We so appreciate all of the people who we work with regularly.
We had a question come in about, and it's kind of going back to the budget making process, what the impact might be if there's a federal shutdown next week for New York State. Would that have an impact on any of the things that you've talked about so far?
Oof.
Just to
Yeah,
open
I
up a
think-
can of worms.
Yeah, right. Well, I think all I can say is I think it's fair to say that, for any state, I mean, this is sort of a bigger picture, like, when there's a shutdown or, significant dysfunction in the flow of funds.
Yeah.
And so that means often it means the flow of funds to human beings directly, to local communities, and to our state. That's always disruptive. And in addition to just, then the state having to, not have, or people not having the resources that
Yeah.
they need. It also is, it's honestly, and it's a distraction from all the other things we need to do.
Yeah.
Meaning, just run, for our policymakers. So, yeah, I mean, on the other hand, I will say, federal action does make a difference when there's investment too. And we saw that, as many of you know, when during the one year of the pandemic, the feds increased the federal child tax credit and lifted, nearly half the kids in the nation out of poverty.
Right.
So public policy really makes a difference. And so, yes, now while our organization mostly focuses on the state, you can't ignore the fact that many of our resources, again, that go to directly to humans and to communities and to the state come from the feds. So yeah, I mean, I guess I would say, yeah, that's disruptive.
Thank you. And as you close out, if you can just tell folks like what to look for moving forward, coming from us and from our partners.
For sure.
So I'm gonna say, first of all, we hope to see all of you on
In person.
in person on January 17th. We will be at the Legislative Office Building, and we will be doing a data briefing on the state of New York children.
And you can register on our website. Our whole team will be there. You can meet everybody in person.
There will be coffee.
And then also, Schuyler Center will be, we do what we call our first look at the budget. So we, look at New York State's budget as compared to our policy priorities, and particularly with impacts on disenfranchised children and families. And so keep your eye out for first look. It comes out usually a couple of weeks after the budget comes out when we've done an analysis. It's on our website, it's on our email. And then we tend to do a next look at the budget when the one house, the Senate and Assembly bills come out. And then we do a last look at the budget after the budget is enacted, and that typically would come out in April, assuming the budget's relatively on time. And what we try to do is distill a lot of information into relatively understandable numbers and words that focus on our priorities.
Yeah, there are a lot of words, but they're
And I'll really say too, we're relentless collaborators. We have a small team here in Albany, and we have so many great partners across New York State. And we rely on so many different partners, and we hope they rely on us too. And so I really invite people to think of us as partners in work to sort of, strengthen our New York.
right.
So
See you
thank you.
soon.
Bye.